Yay, looks good. Okay, cool. Hee hee. I'm so excited. I'm so excited to be doing this virtual keynote. I'm a big fan of the Society of Vertebrate Paleontology in general. And so, yeah, thanks to David and everybody else who's been doing an amazing job putting all these virtual talks together. And I'm excited to be driving paleontology home, haha, with Prehistoric Road Trip. Going to go to my next slide. So I'm going to talk for 30 minutes, maybe a little longer than that. And then I want to leave plenty of time for conversation and discussion and Q&A. And kind of start talking about this PBS series I worked on called Prehistoric Road Trip that came out in 2020, but also how I got to the point of when we hit play for the first time. So my background is not in science. I have I think I took the prerequisite science classes as an undergraduate, but my background's actually in painting. So I graduated from the University of Montana 12 years ago. Coming up on that. But I studied landscape painting, particularly because I'm from South Dakota. And I went to school in Montana, so I was always surrounded by beautiful landscapes. And that is what I did. Very long story short, I started volunteering in the Phil Wright Zoological Museum on the University of Montana's campus. And that was like my last semester, my senior year of college. I completely fell in love with the Natural History Museum and started spending a lot of time in there just painting and drawing specimens from the collection. So this is a theme that still carries through my work today. It's fun that I started as an artist working in museums, then working as an artist, soon to be working in museums again. So yeah, it's kind of like my life is a concentric circle. But anyway, I've been making artwork about the collection. I started a YouTube channel at the end of 2012 that premiered in 2013 called The Brain Scoop. And the goal was to share the behind the scenes work of natural history museums, and specifically the stuff that happens in the collection spaces. And so the project started as a grand experiment. I never expected that when we posted our first video in January of 2013, that a short 4 months later, I would get an offer from the Field Museum in Chicago to come be their first ever chief curiosity correspondent, which was a job title they gave me. And I'm still convinced was the greatest job title ever. So that is where I moved in 2013. And between 2012 and 2020, my team and I, over the years, I worked with one or two other producers, camera people, videographers, editors, and we made over 200 episodes that are on the Brain Scoop channel. And the topics really range quite widely from anthropology and archaeology to the history of natural history, museums, different kinds of organisms. We even talked about, what the value of diverse representation in science media, the history of taxidermy and why it matters today, just kind of everything. One of the things that was very cool about working at the Field Museum during this time was, as many of you know who are familiar with vertebrate paleontology, Sue the T-Rex, one of the largest and most complete Tyrannosaurus Rex specimens ever to be discovered in 1990, has come to live at Chicago in the Field Museum. So when I started at the museum, Sue used to be on display in Stanley Field Hall. As soon as you would walk in the museum entrance, there was Sue and the Carl Akeley fighting elephants. And throughout my time there, the Field Museum exhibitions folks were renovating this space to make Sue's new digs. And we were having a lot of staff discussion at that time. So I'd been a part of a number of conversations, just hearing about the process of putting together this new exhibit. And I had Sue on my mind, which was not out of, normal, considering my relationship with the Field Museum goes back so much farther than just 2013, because I am from, Rapid City, South Dakota, the second largest town in the entire state of South Dakota, which even today still doesn't have 1 million people living in the whole state. But my family is from the tiny town of Faith, South Dakota, population 368 at the end of 2021. And just 5 miles outside of Faith, 20 miles outside of Faith, and about 5 miles south of where Sue the T-Rex was found, is my family's ranch land. So an area where my family homesteaded and was able to take advantage of in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and where my family farms and ranches even today. So when I was growing up, I was constantly surrounded with dinomania. My grandparents were absolute Sue the T-Rex diehards. They, were there when Sue was discovered. My grandfather, as a rancher, of course, knew about all of the buzz of finding the dinosaur, then the eventual seizure, the court case surrounding it. They were intensely interested because it was coming from their backyard. So I kind of grew up in that environment. My grandparents even got me a T-Rex toy of my own when I was 3. And it was very cool. And I just love that I also found this this disposable camera shot of my grandparents at Sue's unveiling. It's just like seeing all the people waiting to get into Stanley Field Hall to see it. It was pretty amazing. So again, even before I worked at the Field Museum, when I was in college, I painted this for my grandfather. And it hung in his retirement room, and then throughout, eventually hung over his bed until he passed away. Literally, it's in my heart. So, okay. So fast forward to 2018, and I've been hearing a lot about, Sue's new digs. And I was thinking about just the extreme unlikelihood that, 1, this dinosaur exists at all, and 2, that I happen to be from a place that has some of the most diverse geology in the entire country. And it was at this time that I was approached by some executives from WTTW, which is Chicago's public broadcast station. And one of the trustees asked me, not the trustees, one of the head of programming asked me if I'd ever thought about doing a television program before. And I hadn't, because I'd never been asked, had I ever been thinking about doing a television program. So I hadn't, but I didn't tell him that. Instead, I said, have you ever heard of Sue the T-Rex? Funny thing about that, I'm kind of close to where this dinosaur is from. And wouldn't it be cool if you could take a road trip? Because you could go to see some of the oldest geology in the country in the Black Hills. That's 2 billion years old, or 1.7 billion years old. You can go see fossils like Sue that are 66 to 68 million years old. You can go out to the Badlands and you can see other, fossils that are 34 million years old. And I was like, all of that within a 2-hour span of time. And I love this topographic map, the 3D rendering by Sean Conway, because you can see, if you zoom in, here is the Black Hills, this sort of red raised spot. It's the highest point in elevation between the eastern extent of the Rocky Mountains and mountain range in France. So because of the Black Hills here, you have the erosional, you can see how the erosion basically gets carried out from the peak of the hills into the Badlands and all these fluvial streams, and that impacts the sedimentology of the entire region. So if you start from the Badlands, or excuse me, the Black Hills, and drive, you can drive from 1.7 billion years all the way, and if you do a big loop, you can end up back at the hot springs site that has mammoths that are 120,000 years old. So you can do a 2 billion year journey in not a very huge space of time. So that's, what we wanted to capture in the concept of Prehistoric Road Trip. Not that we were hitting all of the most diverse geology in the United States, but what you could reasonably accomplish in a 5-day road trip. So we had to have some kind of limits and parameters. And for another thing, initially it was only going to be South Dakota, and then we pitched the idea to PBS in Washington, D.C., and they loved the idea so much. They're like, well, you should go to other states. So go somewhere other than South Dakota and maybe do 3 hours of TV programming instead of 1, which was hilarious because I'd only ever done YouTube videos and then was undertaking a 3-hour long 2 billion year journey that was going to take us 2,000 miles. So anyway, this is the story of how we made that show. So just if you haven't seen Prehistoric Road Trip, that is okay. You will have a chance. You can watch it online now after you're done hearing me babble about it. But we broke the 3 hours up into the different episodes were broken up into interesting ways that were dictated by the geology of the area. So the first episode is basically trying to create a framework for understanding the geologic timescale. It is impossible to wrap your head around the age of the Earth, especially if you are talking to just the American public, or just generally the American public, your average American. That is the audience for Prehistoric Road Trip because it's on public TV. So how do you try to summarize that for 323 million people? I mean, obviously not every American's watching this show. That'd be great and amazing. That didn't happen. This is the problem with me doing virtual presentations. I'm literally just in my house babbling to myself. So at this point in my presentation is when I usually ask for a little bit of grace while I try to refocus and remind myself that I'm not just in my house babbling to myself. So anyway, that is a lot of time to summarize for people. And we didn't want to only do, all of the invertebrate life. We knew that we had to get dinosaurs before the end of the first episode or people wouldn't watch the rest of the series. So how do we get dinosaurs as soon as possible in the first hour of a 3-hour series? And how do we do that while staying true to this big circle of a road trip? So somewhere in this round road trip, we have to be able to make everything fit. So the 145 million year stop was Thermopolis, Wyoming, at the Wyoming Dinosaur Center. So that was the first episode. The second episode focuses on a much smaller period of time. So it was more about the quantity of the diversity within a shorter amount of time. So at the end of the Cretaceous period, just how much was going on at that time, and how do we know? Like, how do we know what the freshwater environment was like? How do we know what was going on with vertebrate life at that time? How did things recover? What was wiped out? How do we know any of this? Then the third episode, again, is sort of another like fast forward. What organisms survived the extinction event? What went on in the subsequent 66 million years? And also, how is the field of paleontology summarized in that amount of time? So I keep talking about the big loop that we made, and this is what I am talking about. So we started our trip in Rapid City because that was, the departure place where I'm from, and that's also where we wanted to start the show. So we start in the Black Hills of South Dakota, which are, again, 2 billion years old, somewhere like that. And we didn't go, obviously this doesn't go in geologic time scale based on if you just start in Rapid City and drive in a big circle. So while we were filming, we had to bounce around a lot. But this is basically, if you wanted to hit as many stops as we went to, it would take you about 34 hours and 2,000 miles. So it is possible. We did it over 9 weeks. And it took us 5,000 miles to film, but it was a good time. So this is what I mean, like, not all of the stops are in sequential order. Like, you can see based on the geology of the landscape what places are concentrated in what parts of the country. So for instance, in the third episode, all of the little yellow stars, like, that is where you find the geologic material that's, 34 million years to 120,000 years. So it was really cool to also put that on a map for people and sort of point out how where the mountain ranges are matters in terms of what kind of fossils you're finding there or not finding there. In addition to wanting to show the widest amount of diversity in terms of like organism and geologic time period, we also really just as much wanted to emphasize the diversity of people and places who are involved in the field of paleontology and geology. So from the very beginning, I wanted to make sure that we were going to as many, community colleges or regional museums, in addition to working with all levels of government, from tribal government, state, federal, working at, large community museums or university museums, community colleges. So I love this chart the most because working on it was, I think, one of the most gratifying things of the entire show is when you're looking at such a massive topic and a massive space and time, you're like, how many people can we have represented? Like, what is the most accurate snapshot we can give at this point in time between the months of June and September 2019? Who is here? Who is doing this field work during the summer that we're doing the road trip? And that is who we try to incorporate. So I was absolutely not the only one responsible for making this show. I just happened to have my face in front of the camera. But I was joined by 6 amazing people. Allie Gimbel was my co-executive producer. She's with the big dino model bone up there. Julie Florio and Tim Boyd were running camera. Anthony Mariotto was our sound person. Raven Forrest was our production assistant, and Jason Ader was our gaffer. And he's basically, lights the equipment truck. Any equipment that you need for your stuff, a gaffer is going to be responsible for. So we also had illustrations by Franz Anthony, who, if you're in the Vert Paleo world, I'm sure you've seen some of his beautiful artwork. He does a lot of fun illustrations for 252 MYA and that whole group, and animations by Natalia Mercado. So we were a small team. We also had 2 editors who were not pictured, but Prehistoric Road Trip was made on a tight budget. And we're really proud of the work that we did. So just to give you a couple of very brief anecdotes of some of the things that we included in the series for each episode, things I'm excited about. So for one thing, stromatolites. This was something I really insisted on. And sometimes when I would get my mind around something, it would often be difficult to communicate to my production colleagues why this thing mattered. And I was like, we're going to start the show, and we're going to go talk about some of the most important, incredible fossils anywhere on the planet. And everyone's going to be like, you cannot be serious. You want us to include fossil bacteria? Fossil bacteria in the dinosaur road trip show. You're going to start with fossil bacteria. And I said, you bet we are. And so that is what we did. And Dr. Kelly Trujillo from the Laramie Community College was so great because she took us on this high elevation hike. We were there like 11,000, 12,000 feet in elevation, standing on the biggest fossilized stromatolite. I don't know if it's the largest period, but it's absolutely massive. And if for those that don't know, stromatolites are fossils that are created through the subsequent layers of cyanobacteria in sediment for billions and billions and billions and billions and billions of years. Well, maybe millions and millions, billions times 2. But that basically by them burping up oxygen as a byproduct of the photosynthesis process is what contributed to all the oxygen we have in our atmosphere today. So absolutely, we're going to include our greatest X to the 100, whatever exponent grandfathers, grandmothers in there. Also, one of the coolest sites that we filmed at were the Bear Gulch fossil fish exposure that is outside of Lewistown, Montana. This was really cool because this huge amount of rock is like 90 feet. It represents, I think, like 20,000 years of time. So really not that long, but preserves an amazing assortment of fish biodiversity from 323 million years ago, including some of the earliest cartilaginous sharks and like chimera looking things. So that was a lot of fun. And I just love to point this out too, that Jason, when he does lights, how do you run lights for a show when you don't have electricity? He has to harness the power of the sun. So he's holding basically a giant piece of styrofoam that has a reflective side, and he has to stand there and try and direct the light down toward us. So that was fun. Here he is again, also harnessing the power of the sun. So this was in the second episode. We wanted to show people just the process of how do you find a dinosaur in the first place? And what does that even look like? Because we all love Jurassic Park. Is it accurate? Big question mark. Sometimes it's closer than I think we'd like to admit, that sometimes it kind of does almost happen like it does in the movies. And this was one of those times where Dave and his team from the Royal Ontario Museum, we contacted them and we said, hey, we're this film crew. We're going to be out there in the summer 2019. Do you have anything you're digging up that we could come and film? And Dave was like, maybe. We found like the occipital condyle sticking out of the side of a hill on the last day of the last, afternoon of the field season. Danielle Defoe from their team had come across it. And he said, so, when you're out there, that'll be the second day. We're going back to see if it's anything. We'll have enough, we'll remove some overburden and then you can start filming day 2. So that is what we did. We, with no expectations, went into this thinking like maybe we would just excavate a little bit of the condyle and that would be it. But over the course of the morning, it became increasingly more and more exciting because as we started to dig down, we were able to expose not only the brow horns, but also one of the nose horns, or one of the brow horns, a nose horn, the beak. And essentially, like, this condyle is what was sticking up over the ground, but the whole thing was flipped upside down. And it's like, you cannot ask for better television. It was the most thrilling thing. The whole crew we were losing our minds. And then a couple years later, I actually got to go visit the ROM, and Dave told me to hop up on that jacket with Danielle Defoe. So I did get permission to do that. But we got to see some of the parts of that specimen that had already been prepared out. And I wish I had had a camera with me filming at that point to be able to do a cool follow-up, because it was pretty amazing that it went so soon from it being, discovered, excavated, and then shipped off to the lab. Was pretty awesome. Also, well, now that was the first 2 episodes. The third episode, we're trying to, like, how do we wrap up this show? Knowing that, one, there's still a lot of material. We left the second episode at 66 million years ago, so it's not like we don't have tens of millions of years to cover. But what are the other things that we want people to walk away with? Not just understanding, like, having a better appreciation for the geologic time period, or just the different kinds of fossils that are being found in this part of the country. But we wanted to make some links that felt a little more topical. So one of these narratives that we focused on for the third episode was the story of the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum, the PETM, which was this massive climate change event that happened around 56 million years ago that has the most similar atmosphere in terms of, like, the CO2 makeup today as it did, like, oh, it's so confusing for me to talk about this, like years after I wrote the audio for it. But the atmosphere today, the amount of carbon in the atmosphere, this is as close as it was during this mass extinction event that happened over a period of millions of years. And we have done the same amount of amping up the CO2 in a period of like 200 years. So looking at this spike in CO2 levels and how these plant paleobotanists are learning about it, I think was so topical and timely. And another topic that we got into a little bit more in the third episode is just the nature of the field of paleontology. Because as we know, paleontology is not a very old science, and it's pretty easy to see how the field, just how it grew with the growth of our country and how it was shaped by colonialism, period. Like everything is shaped in the United States. To that point, we interviewed Dr. Lawrence Graslie from University of Nebraska, Omaha. And his background is in geography and geology. And he talks about it partially because he wanted to go into paleontology, but academic racism kept him out of the program. And I actually have his book, this one. He wrote, this was his thesis, his dissertation topic, Dinosaurs and Indians, Paleontology Resource Dispossession from Sioux Lands. So this is one of the most impactful books that I read as part of research for Prehistoric Road Trip, just because it so clearly is able to just synthesize looking at the history of tribal maps and reservation maps as they were outlined during certain treaties through the development of the country, and then going through museum collections and looking at the specimen labels for fossils and seeing where the overlap is. Because there's a case to be made that, you know, native consent, indigenous input has not historically been a part of paleontology. And so Lawrence Graslie, his research is looking into that. He was an invaluable resource for that topic. And kind of related to that, where's the field of paleontology? Where is the field of paleontology headed? Not just in terms of like the discoveries that we think are going to be made or the new technology that will be applied to help us understand specimens discovered 100 years ago versus things we're discovering now, but also in terms of like inclusivity and acknowledging that fossils are a resource, one that have a significant monetary value, especially when you're looking at vertebrate fossils. So when you look at, you know, historic dispossession of vertebrate fossil material from native lands, it becomes a really political topic as well. Something that, you know, paleontology is not immune from conversations about social justice. And so that's another thing that was incredibly important to me throughout the whole show. You know, it was as important that be a takeaway as people understanding that the planet is 4 billion years old. And I love this picture because we were out there with Ben Eagle, who's the fossil preparator for the Standing Rock Institute of Natural History, which unfortunately, we found out the day that we came to film Ben and his colleague Sonia White Mountain that their funding had been cut and they would be closing their doors in a few weeks. And that was literally the day we showed up to film. And so it really was one of those things that, like a gut punch, you know, where we're standing in this picture, all of those brown pieces, that's fossil float. You couldn't take a step anywhere in this place without coming across some kind of fragment. And so it's this real tension between, like, you can see it, you can see the information eroding away on the landscape, but without the funds, without the infrastructure, we can't support places like the Standing Rock Institute of Natural History. And so this information may be lost if there's not more funding or support behind these kind of programs in rural parts of the country. So there was a lot to summarize in that 3 hours of time. And I can only do so much in a 20-minute, 30-minute presentation about it. So I highly recommend that you stream it. You can watch it on wttw.com/prehistoric road trip. I also have it linked on my website. But also for all of you educators out there, and I love to talk about this, we put so much energy also into making like web exclusive videos. We did a mini series called Meet the Rock Stars of Paleontology, where we included a bunch of additional interviews and asking paleontologists and scientists to talk about their experience in the field, what got them interested in it. We also, if you go to pbslearningmedia.com, made an entire educator resource thing, a whole thing, like we have support materials for the entire series. Every scene is broken down into standards, discussion questions, additional reading or things to watch. So if you're an educator, I highly encourage you to look at the PBS Learning Media material for Prehistoric Road Trip, because it is such a good resource if you're doing any geology outreach or what have you. So that is my summary of my show. And now we can maybe talk. I'd like to do the question part the most. So I'm looking forward if anybody has questions. Anyway, thank you. Oh, and thank you to everybody who helped make Prehistoric Road Trip possible. Literally in numerous people across the Field Museum, WTTW, my crew, post-production, pre-production, production, and everybody else who makes public TV possible. So thank you. Thank you. Yahoo! Woohoo! Yeah, if anybody has questions, pipe in or just drop them in the chat. Or I'll just keep saying awkward things to myself.
Emily, what was your favorite non-vertebrate fossil that you found on Prehistoric Road Trip?
Favorite
came across fossil? I guess, yeah.
Bivalves, fossil clams. So it was during our second episode, we were focusing on the PETM, not the PETM, the KT boundary. And this was one of those times where I started the episode and I was like, you think Triceratops is going to be the most exciting thing? Get ready for fossil clams. And I think one of the things I loved about it is these freshwater bivalves were living in the streams that were being, flooded with all of the stuff before, during, and after the extinction event. And so you're able to look at the chemical makeup in the depositional layers on the bivalve's shell in order to figure out what the water chemistry would have been like 66 million years ago. And that blew my mind. I had no idea that was a thing. So that was pretty cool. Larissa did ask, no worries, great show. What's next? The brain scoop's coming back. That's what's next. I forgot to bring that up kind of in my presentation, but yeah, I left the brain scoop when I departed from the Field Museum at the end of 2020, and then we started chatting again, and I was like, hey, remember the brain scoop? That was pretty fun. We should do that again. And they're like, yeah, go do that. That sounds like a good idea. So yeah, we're hoping to do a relaunch early next year. I'm thrilled about it. How much involvement did Animal Logic have in this? Animal Logic, Danielle Defoe is the creator of that program, and she didn't have any involvement other than she was like, Danielle was in the show. We interviewed her and featured her in our Rockstars of Paleontology segment. What was personally favorite stop or part of developing the program? Oh my gosh. I think the cool thing about developing the show was that it took us a year and a half to plan it. Like I got the thumbs up from PBS in the beginning of 2018 that we could have this show premiering as soon as 2020. And so at that time, basically I started just by cold emailing people from around the area, like Museum of the Rockies, South Dakota School of Mines, people at the Badlands. I just started firing emails off and being like, does anybody want to help me with this show, please? And I got so much good input and feedback, and those people, you know, became our closest production partners. And I ended up working with, you know, dozens of folks over the course of a year and a half to prepare for the filming, to actually do the filming, and then post filming communication. So I just love that I got to meet so many cool people from the area. That was a great time. What advice would I give to someone starting in science communication? That's a great question. I'm reluctant to give advice that is any like platform specific, because the platforms keep changing too much. So I've been doing science communication for over 10 years now. My first real place that I launched my career from was Tumblr. Like I started a Tumblr, which was a blog site that may be now coming back into fashion, ? But it started with Tumblr and then YouTube and Twitter. And I think the backbone of all of that science communication, what has laid a good foundation is just figuring out what it is that resonates with you in terms of the science that gets you excited. Because if you can just lean into what gets you excited, it's just gonna emanate naturally. People will respond to it. So the more genuinely that you can tap into the topic, the more success you will have in reaching people who will also find that thing to be interesting. That is my suggestion on that. Okay, I'm going through more questions. Yay! Oh, thank you. Brain scoop enthusiasm. Hooray! Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Do I have any more information on how indigenous tribes view fossils? Well, another good thing to read. This was my reference shelf for all of the books that I read. I think two books that could be interesting. This one not as much. These are both by Adrian Mayer. The first, Fossil Hunters, which was pretty interesting take on, you know, I think some of the things we know to be commonly told, I wouldn't call them myths, but like, you know, the myth of the giant came from mammoth skulls because of the big nasal hole in the front of it. So Adrian Mayer wrote that. She also wrote Fossil Legends of the First Americans, which I think can get you started on a good path in terms of like looking into indigenous belief systems around fossils. That said, she admits this is not, I mean, these were some oral histories that she took down. But other than, I mean, it's not comprehensive by any means. And there are so many different indigenous groups and people within the United States. It's just impossible to be able to say like one belief system or how things are viewed one way or another. But yeah, this is a good book. I'd recommend starting with that. Have I noticed any significant positive differences in science and science communication since you started? Yeah, I think scientists have done a much better job in the last 10 years of seeing the value of science communication. Like when I started at the Field Museum, I think there was a lot of dubiousness around like why I even have science communication. And at that time, the mentality really was scientists aren't good at talking about their stuff, which I don't think that's fair to either party. I think scientists are too busy to be professional communicators, and I think professional communicators could work with scientists and help them a lot in terms of like making their material more engaging to the public. And so I think that kind of has evened out. Like, I don't think like you have to spend as much time talking to younger generations of scientists about the value of science communication. I think people who are coming up in the field now, maybe early career folks, certainly understand the importance of science communication, and also how to democratize science a little bit more. So not just, citizen science, but actually calling it community science, because you don't have to be an American citizen to care or be involved in science. So I think I see a lot of those initiatives coming into fruition that are really like empathy based, and where scientists themselves are kicking down their own ivory towers and being like, all right, we all gotta take a deep breath and remind ourselves that we're all on the same planet and we all like dinosaurs. Like, that's why we're all here. And to just have a lot more fun with all of it. So yeah, I love seeing science communication becoming a lot more relaxed. I don't think relaxed is the word. Accessible, though. Yeah. Other questions? Oh, I'm just reading all the nicer things. Have I received much positive feedback about the show and the accompanying resources? That's kind of why I'm asking if you guys will use the educational resources, because I don't know. PBS doesn't give me that information. And the people at PBS Learning Media don't either. So I have a question mark of how often the materials are being used. I think our best shot of them getting used is just spreading the word that those are resources we put a lot of good educator feedback, like expertise on. So hopefully they're being used. Yeah. Did my trip inspire any art? Yes. Oh, absolutely it did. I have if you will indulge me, allow me to do another screen share. Let's do this one. So I sell my artwork now on my website. I sell prints as well as originals, but one of the things that I have, I painted an entire series of paintings inspired by Prehistoric Road Trip. And so I sell like a little print pack, a little 5 for the price of 4 print packs. And there are other paintings I did inspired by Prehistoric Road Trip too. So like, this is from the scene in the first episode when we were filming the 1.7 billion year old granite boulders. And this is from outside of Hanna, Wyoming, where we were filming the Paleocene, Eocene thermal maximum scenes with the plant fossils. And this is another view from that same scene. This is the Bear Gulch. I showed you the picture. This was the reference photo that I used to make this big painting. And this was driving close to Edgemont, South Dakota. But anyway, so yeah, I during the pandemic especially, I spent a lot of time going through pictures of where we were filming and making all these paintings inspired by the show. So like Ekalaka, Montana, if you know about the dino shindig that they do every summer. Yeah, so all of these are from Prehistoric Road Trip. Any more Prehistoric Road Trips planned? No, I wish. I did end up pitching a Prehistoric Parks show to PBS. I was like, wouldn't it be cool if we could do the prehistory of a bunch of national parks, and then they didn't pick up that idea. But I still think it would be cool. So yeah, I have a 4-year-old. When are you moving to Dinosaur Train on PBS? I don't know. Probably my nephew's gonna be getting older, and I'm sure he's gonna want to see that too. I'm just gonna force him to watch Prehistoric Road Trip. Is that weird? That's not weird. Maybe that's weird. Oh, have I sold any originals? Yes, I'm lucky that I have, actually. That is what has been supporting my science communication work, is art. Isn't that the funny thing? Isn't that a little ironic? When I was graduating with my painting degree, that's what I got of law. It's like, what are you gonna do with that? How are you ever gonna support yourself through art? And then I ended up leaving a full-time job at a science center and am now supporting my science work with art. So who's laughing now? Hee hee. I agree, art and science absolutely do go together. Yeah. Well, this was awesome. Thank you all for coming. And I hope this was a fun way to wrap up the virtual SVP session. Good job, David, for putting it together. I know it's been such a massive, massive feat. Yay. Cool.
Let's jump into encourage folks, if they do have any questions. We have maybe room for maybe 1 or 2 more, depending on how extensive the answer is. Emily, if you could do an international road trip, we're going to put that out there, what would be like your top 5 places where like someone's going to write you a big check? Where are you taking your film crew?
Oh, that's Burgess Shale.
On the spot a little bit, I know. Sorry.
I know. I would say, yeah, I want to do some Burgess Shale stuff. I want to go see some whale fossils in South America. I've got some Karoo Basin stuff I want to go check out. Some synapsids. Got to go check out Mary Anning's digs over in the UK. I want to go to Mongolia and look at ceratopsians. Apparently, I do have quite the bucket list for things. I was like, no, I haven't thought of anything outside the US. And I'm like, here we go. Honestly, I should just hit up some of Kirk and Ray's
there you go.
line stuff. Which also, I mean, these were amazing resources as well. This was like my biggest disappointment, is I had a whole like speaking tour of promotional talks that were associated with Prehistoric Road Trip, but because it came out during 2020, it all got canceled. And I was going to have my big, like, here are all of the books you need to pick up and read. I just remember this because Ray and Kirk made some amazing resources. Kelly Trujillo is on this call. Hi, Kelly.
Do you have any we've had a lot of museum and like teaching college folks and folks kind of on that end of things, especially during this. Do you have any, I don't know, last words of support or encouragement or anything for folks who are doing that important but maybe less seen work within paleontology?
I mean, it is one of those things that outreach work, educational work, you don't often get like immediate satisfaction because you don't know like the little gem that you're planting in someone's mind. It might not come to fruition for a year or 10 years or 20 years. A lot of the videos that I made, years and years ago, that I wouldn't say are like the most profound things I ever did, resonated with people enough that planted an idea in their mind that, oh, maybe science is something that I could do, or that I'm looking at someone who doesn't have a traditional background. Like, I'm an artist, and if I can make a paleo show, maybe you can too. So it's really supporting like the diversity of thought and experience that people have, and remembering that you are part of that diversity as well. That there are far more people outside of academia than are inside of academia. And it is very much worthwhile to remember that we have a whole other world of people to reach with paleontology and education. And sometimes you just don't know until they hit you up like 10 years later. And then they're like, you inspired me, and now I'm dedicating my master's thesis to you, or whatever
Well,
it
that's
might
very
be.
sweet.
Yeah. You never know. But
Well, I think that's a
cool.
great note to close this on. Thank you, Emily, for coming and doing this wonderful talk for us. And thank you, everyone that showed up tonight. And thank you, everyone, for a really great meeting. I really enjoyed a lot of the conversations I got to have, and having all of these guest speakers and facilitating conversations and all that. So be on the lookout over the next couple of months for that feedback survey. We're going to get started on planning probably quicker than you might imagine for next year. And I think that'll do it. Emily, I'll leave it to you if you want to say bye to everyone, and then we're going to shut down the feed.
Yeah, I just wanted to say hello. Thank you. Hello, thank you for coming, and appreciated you being here. And I wish we could all be in a big room together, but this is so okay. Take care, everyone.
Absolutely.
Have a great Sunday.
Thanks, Emily.